Hello, everyone. I'm Reverend Mary Hawk. I'm one of the coordinators for Nashville Pagan Pride Day, and I want to thank you for coming. And we are very happy to have Obron Zell here. He has been one of the most active pagans since the 60s. He's done so much for our community, and we are just honored to have him with us to talk to us about the year the earth stood still. So, Oberon, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mary. I'm glad to be here. Well, these are indeed those interesting times of the notorious Chinese curse or blessing, depending how you feel about interesting. We're all finding ourselves in the same handbasket with everyone else on the planet. Quarantined, sequestered, hunkered down, and isolated as in a siege. Many of us are finding this a good time for reflection, reading, TV binge watching, and creativity. I can't help but be reminded of the 1951 classic sci-fi movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still. I presume many of you have seen that. In the film, the entire civilized world is brought to a halt when an alien emissary from an interplanetary policing organization neutralizes electricity globally for 30 minutes. Except for such essential services as hospitals and airplanes in flight. Well, this little demonstration is a warning to humanity to cease our interminable wars and aggressions, or the grown-ups will step in and eliminate the problem. Says Klaatu, the emissary, to an assembly of scientists and world leaders, your choice is simple. Join us and live in peace, or pursue your present course and face obliteration. We shall be waiting for your answer. Well, this film reportedly inspired President Ronald Reagan to discuss uniting against an alien invasion when meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev in 1985. And 2 years later, right after the Harmonic Convergence, Reagan told the United Nations, I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. The idea that only an alien invasion could unite a divided humanity in constant conflict has long been a staple theme of science fiction, as in Independence Day and The Watchmen. In this time of solitary retreat, withdrawal, and reflection, perhaps we may consider that this global pandemic is just that, an alien invasion from which no one is exempt. We are united in our separation. This is not just a day, however, but a year in which the earth stands still. Going on 2 years, we are between the worlds. However, the COVID pandemic is not an alien invasion from beyond our world. A more Gaian way of looking at this is to consider how living organisms function. Over 50 years ago, in my journal article, Theogenesis, the Birth of the Goddess, in which I articulated the profound revelation I'd had of the biological unity of our planetary biosphere, the first iteration of what has become known as the Gaia thesis, I wrote, when in the human body, some cells start multiplying all out of control and excreting toxins into the bloodstream, we have a cancer. At this moment, humanity as a species is multiplying wildly out of control and excreting vast quantities of deadly toxins into the air, water, and soil. If our own cancerous population growth is not halted, indeed drastically reduced, our numbers and poisons will eventually cripple or kill our planetary organism, Gaia. She has her own devices for regulating overpopulation, plague, famine, drought, flood, etc. Or we could save ourselves a lot of grief and just decide not to have so many children. But the essential mandate for every species is to reproduce as much as possible in a relentless competition to dominate the gene pool with our own progeny. This attitude is the basic game plan of the Catholic Church, Mormons, Islam, and many other religions whose agenda is to take over the world by outbreeding everyone else. The largest portion of the human gene pool are the descendants of Genghis Khan, who murdered and raped his way across all of Asia. And right now, there are more than 7 billion of us hairless apes on the planet. But Mother Nature has her own systems to regulate populations and maintain balance. The most obvious, of course, is the predator to prey ratio. As more prey becomes available, the predators who eat them will duly increase their numbers. Eat prey, love. Morning Glory used to say that Gaia's attitude was, have lots of babies. Somebody will eat them. But if the balance gets wildly out of control, Gaia has another card up her sleeve, plague. In another sci-fi reference, you may recall the penultimate scene from another H.G. Wells novel written in 1897 that George Pal made into the movie, War of the Worlds. After the Martian invaders had easily overcome all Earth's military defenses and all seemed lost, the narrator discovers that all the Martians have been mysteriously killed by simple earthly pathogens to which they had no immunity. To quote from the book, Martians dead, slain by the putrefactive and diseased bacteria against which their systems were unprepared. Slain after all man's devices had failed by the humblest things that God in his wisdom had put upon this earth. These germs of disease have taken toll of humanity since the beginning of things, taken toll of our pre-human ancestors since life began here. But by virtue of this natural selection of our kind, we have developed resisting power. By the toll of 1 billion deaths, man has bought his birthright of the earth, and it is his against all comers. It would still be his were the Martians 10 times as mighty as they are, for neither do men live nor die in vain. Well, in the totality of Gaia as a single vast living organism, pandemic plague viruses play the role of Gaia's antibodies. They are the agents of her immune system, just as the antibodies in our own blood are used by our immune system to identify and neutralize foreign objects such as pathogenic bacteria and viruses, to maintain a healthy balance for the entire organism. Just remember what philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said, that which does not kill us makes us stronger. So let's talk about the cycles of time. From a magical as well as historical perspective, it is clear that time does not move in a straight line, but in spiraling cycles. The minute hand of the clock goes around and around, but it moves forward 1 hour in each turning. The days of the week come around again, but move forward through the months. The seasons turn through the great wheel of the year, and spring always follows winter, but the years roll forward down the centuries and eons. All things appear to move through time in cycles, but every cycle is part of a larger cycle, which is also moving, and so nothing stays in the same place. The next larger cycles carry us forward one more loop for each turning. On a cosmic level, those spiraling cycles continue. The Earth turns from day to night, and the moon circles around each month. But the Earth and the moon are also circling the sun through the seasons, along with all the other planets, moons, comets, etc. But all this doesn't bring us around to the same place each year, because the solar system is also spiraling around the galaxy, along with all the other star systems. And of course, the galaxy itself is also moving through the cosmos, and so it goes. Now, just about every 60 years, with remarkable regularity over the past 6 centuries, there has occurred a cultural renaissance in Western civilization. Each of these periods has seen a flowering of the arts, poetry, music, literature, drama, culture, sciences, spirituality, sexuality, social movements, and utopian communities. In particular, each cycle has also seen a return of the goddess as archetypal muse. Those who come of age in their teens and 20s during such a cycle will be wise elders, wizards, sages in their 70s and 80s next time around, whose task will become mentoring of the next generation of young heroes, as it is in the stories. Here are the dates for each of these renaissances that I have mapped. The 1480s was the Italian Florentine Renaissance. The 1540s was the Reformation, the Age of Discovery. The 1600s, the Golden Age, the English Renaissance, the 1660s, the Scientific Revolution, the 1720s, the Great Awakening, the Enlightenment, the 1780s, the Age of Reason, American and French Revolutions, the 1840s, the Transcendentalist Awakening, the 1900s, the Golden Dawn, the dawn of magic, the 1960s, the New Age, the Consciousness Revolution, the 2020s, the Awakening, and I project for the 2080s, the Gaiaspora. Now, the wheel is turning again, and consciousness of the goddess is reemerging throughout the world. What can we expect this time around? And how can we shape the cosmic decade according to our hopes rather than our fears? Now imagine you're walking along a path through a rolling countryside. Sometimes the path takes you into deep valleys with forests on either side of you. You cannot see to the sides and you cannot see far ahead, but you have a map which you are following, and landmarks along the way are marked on the map. Eventually, your path brings you to the top of a mountain. From there, you can look back over the path you've already traveled, and you can look ahead over the path yet before you, as far at least as the next mountaintop. So from this high vantage point, you take out your notebook and you draw a new map of the road ahead. You mark on it the rivers, forests, rocky outcroppings, villages, deserts, swamps, and other features you will have to pass or cross to reach that distant peak. Now, as the various cycles of time turn and turn again, each time we come round to the same season, it is like coming to the top of the next high mountain. And if we know how to look out, that vantage point allows us to see the next cycle, the path through the valley to the next mountaintop. Throughout the ages, many prophets, seers, and visionaries have viewed the coming ages from such peaks of history's synchronicity waves and cycles. They have left recorded prophecies, which may be seen as roadmaps of time. But while the visions of such seers as Nostradamus, Mother Shipton, and Edgar Cayce have provided intriguing maps of the future from their times to ours, they've only been able to see to the top of the next peak from where they stood. And that peak is where we now stand. Those prophetic maps are now obsolete and can chart our path no further. It is now time for the drawing of new maps and the charting of a new future, a future which we can create through our vision and imagination. Wizards say that the best way to predict the future is to create it. So let me tell you a little story about changing the future by magic. In the late 1950s and early 60s, when I was a young man, most people throughout the world believed unquestionably that a global nuclear holocaust was both inevitable and imminent. We lived under the shadow of a mushroom-shaped doom of Damoclean annihilation. Virtually every book, movie, and TV show about the future made in those days assumed that civilization would soon be destroyed in a nuclear war, and any survivors would be battling hideous mutants in the post-apocalyptic radioactive ruins. People were building fallout shelters in their basements and backyards, uselessly made out of cinder blocks and plywood and stocked with bottled water and inedible military rations. None were ever opened. Now, this conviction of an inevitable nuclear apocalypse ran so deep that in 1960, when George Pal made an excellent movie of H.G. Wells' 1895 novel, The Time Machine, let's have a picture for that one, he felt he had to include a nuclear war as the time traveler journeys into the future. We're way ahead of the pictures here. Got to back up a little bit. We are missing the Time Machine movie poster. Well, all right. We'll just have to go on forward. That's too bad. Well, that's all right. Anyway, Wells felt that he had to include a nuclear war as the time traveler journeys into the future. But an important part of that story is showing the temporal chronometer on the dashboard of the time machine, which indicates the date. So Pal had the time traveler make a stop just as the great nuclear holocaust was being unleashed. And the date on the dial read August 19th, 1966, only 6 years from the release of the film. And that seemed reasonable. But when August of 1966 rolled around, we didn't have a nuclear war. Instead, something else happened that changed our world forever. That's September 8th, only 3 weeks later, a new TV show premiered with a completely new and hopeful vision of the future in which there had been no global nuclear holocaust and a united humanity was traveling among the stars. Well, this show, as you've surely guessed by now, was Star Trek. Its creator, Gene Roddenberry, is said to have explained his intention as, "I'm trying to present a new vision of the future that will be so compelling that people will choose it over a global nuclear holocaust." And so he did. One of the greatest acts of magic in our time. Over half a century, 9 TV series, all continuing in syndication. And just a moment here. We have got a little bit of a glitch in the setup here. What are we doing here? Okay. That's just very interesting. I've just lost my picture here. All right, there we go. All righty. All right. Over half a century, 9 TV series and 14 movies have created a powerful future vision that has inspired both our imagination and our technology towards the exploration of space and given us the greatest mission statement of magical intent ever articulated: to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before. And the same Renaissance decade that brought us Star Trek saw the inception of the many movements that have also changed the world in so many ways: sexual freedom, free speech, civil rights, social justice, anti-war, psychedelics, environmentalism, gay rights, the women's movement, the New Age movement, and of course, the revival of the old religion in the form of neo-paganism and witchcraft. And now we stand on the threshold of another Renaissance decade, which began this year. It has already been given a name: the Awakening. As happens every 60 years, this is a time of magic, a time for us to conceive and articulate a unified 2020 vision of the world we want to bring into manifestation. This is the decade when the generation born in the dawning years not only of this century, this millennium, but also in the dawning of the age of Aquarius, will be coming of age, just as our present elders did 60 years ago. Therefore, this aspect requires that we elders empower our youth, the leaders of tomorrow, and focus our energy on what in our world we want to bring into manifestation. So here are a few visions and prophecies for the 2020s. First, good news, hopes. In the 2020s, Gen Z, pagan kids, and young adults will become the natural leaders in their schools and communities. They will garner respect among their peers and become role models for their intelligence, kindness, compassion, knowledge, and wisdom, learned from their pagan families and pagan festivals. As these young leaders arise, many will rally to their causes, and their influence will spread throughout a growing subculture, as did that of the hippies last time around in the 1960s. In the 2020s, the Gaia thesis, that the entire planetary biosphere is a single vast living organism, will become the preeminent paradigm and unifying image in the Western world, bringing peoples of all persuasions together in a global family. We will recognize that we are all children of the same mother, as well as cells in her immense body. In the 2020s, we will see a worldwide earth-friendly political movement really taking hold. Planetary healing and restoration will become the great mission of many people and countries, to be funded and organized as an international Gaia Corps, just as the Peace Corps was in the 1960s. Example, the Pachamama Alliance. Many will identify as Earth warriors, Gaia's guardians, Mama's minions, Earth guardians, etc. In the 2020s, organizations and individuals will achieve national prominence and public respect for their educational efforts and activism in environmental cleanup, wildlife rescue, community gardens, highway adoption, social justice, equal rights, community service, and organized opposition to logging, mining, drilling, fracking, and other environmentally and socially destructive practices. In the late 2020s, as the fastest growing and already second largest faith group in the US, modern paganism will begin to vie with the declining Christianity as the preeminent religion in America, as well as in much of the Western world. Economic prosperity will finally come to the pagan community via flourishing pagan businesses, creative enterprises, and a national pagan credit union. Pagan-owned lands will grow into significant and expanding territories, providing for pagan villages and ever larger land-based communities. Permanent festival sites and retreat facilities will become more and more elaborate, with stone circles, temples, cemeteries, orchards, gardens, labyrinths, baths, guest facilities, homes, stores, restaurants, etc. Expect significant backlash from Christian fundamentalists and televangelists as they realize they are losing the culture war they started in the 1920s and escalated in the 60s. In the 2020s, neo-pagan outreach to other non-Abrahamic religious communities will result in global alliances that will swell the ranks of so-identified pagans to include Hindus, Shinto, Hellenes, Baltics, Norse, and all indigenous peoples, Native Americans, Australian Aborigines, Polynesians, Ifa, Afro-Caribbeans, etc. Paganism, in all its diversity, will be recognized as the largest religious category in the world. In the 2020s, psychic phenomena, especially telepathy and the clairsenses, will become more and more widespread and accepted. Seed pods and clusters of people will begin to link up telepathically, as in the TV series Sense8. The veil between the worlds of the living and the dead will become more permeable. Reincarnation will become widely acknowledged. So here's a few anticipated breakthroughs for the coming decade. In the 2020s, the animal meat industry will be virtually phased out by plant-grown and cloned meats. In the 2020s, replacement organs and other body parts will be grown from the patient's own stem cells or even 3D printed. No more transplanting of donor organs from other people. Also, no more need for prosthetics. In the 2020s, woolly mammoths will be resurrected via cloning and established in protected Pleistocene parks alongside bison, caribou, and muskoxen. Resurrection of other extinct animals will follow. In the 2020s, artificial theropod dinosaurs will be recreated via genetic engineering from emus, cassowaries, hoatzins, and maybe even chickens. They will become popular attractions in zoos, parks, and as exotic pets. In the 2020s, 3D printing will become as ubiquitous and cheap as home paper printing is now. Many items will cease to be mass-produced and sold as they are replaced with print-on-demand programs for toys, tools, spare parts, and countless other items, even body parts. Many stores and factories will go out of business. In the 2020s, virtual reality will supplement and eventually supplant all other forms of visual media, as movies, TV, communications, etc., will all be translated into fully immersive 3D experiences, as in Ready Player One and Jumanji. New art forms will be created which take place entirely in virtual reality. Many people will become seriously addicted to living their entire lives in virtual reality, even neglecting to eat. In the 2020s, virtual reality communications will go global, with a satellite communications network and quantum entangled system, providing instant communication across all space. People will be able to project their holographic avatars to any place in the world, and eventually to extraterrestrial locations as well. In the 2020s, quantum computing will supplant all other systems, eventually giving birth to true cyber sentience, like in all the sci-fi stories, movies, and TV shows. Undeterred by countless fictional examples, idiots will continue striving to create androids that are indistinguishable from humans. And as in all those stories, this will create unprecedented problems as sentient machines inevitably start making their own decisions and agendas. In the 2020s and 2030s, permanent bases will be established on the moon and Mars, and the beginnings of human colonies on those worlds. Mining operations will be commenced on the moon. In the 2020s, 2030s, alien life will be discovered on Mars, Jupiter, Europa, Enceladus, and elsewhere in the solar system. Remnants of alien structures and artifacts will be found on the moon, Mars, Phobos, and Deimos. In the 2020s, 2030s, the continuing evolution of the internet will create a technological vehicle of global consciousness, resulting in a planetary awakening. In a 1926 interview with Collier's magazine, Nikola Tesla said, "When wireless is perfectly applied, the whole Earth will be converted into a huge brain, which in fact it is, all things being particles of a real and rhythmic whole." In the 2020s and 2030s, petroleum-based internal combustion engines and power plants will be virtually phased out and supplanted by significant advances in solar cell efficiency, improved batteries, hydrogen power, wind generators, ZPGs, and many other technological breakthroughs yet to be discovered. Cold fusion will finally be achieved, providing cheap and virtually limitless power. Nikola Tesla's visions will finally come true. And now for the bad news, the fears. In the 1920s, rising global temperatures will result in accelerated melting of the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets. Deprived of the immense weight of all that ice, both depressed continents will rebound, displacing more water than is currently anticipated from melting alone and raising sea levels significantly throughout the world. Warmer water will expand in volume, adding to the sea rise. The addition of so much fresh water from Greenland will interrupt the Gulf Stream, plummeting eastern Canada and the British Isles into a deep chill. Coral reefs will die in warmer, deeper waters. Low-lying coastal areas like Florida and islands in the Pacific and Caribbean will become submerged and disappear. In the Mississippi Valley, California's Central Valley, and the Amazon Basin will flood. Inland seas will form in Australia and Central Africa. Much of the world's prime food-producing regions will be inundated. Populations will have to shift inland to higher and less fertile elevations. These displacements and food shortages will result in unprecedented conflicts, wars, starvation, pestilence, and eventually significant reduction of the human population, a time of great anguish and turmoil. In the 2020s, warmer oceans will result in an increasing frequency and severity of tropical storms, hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones, and tornadoes, with consequent flooding. Thawing permafrost in the tundra will release great quantities of frozen methane, poisoning vast regions of the taiga and rendering them uninhabitable for humans and animals. A permanently ice-free Arctic Ocean will allow year-round evaporation, resulting in increasing snowfall in the higher latitudes and ever more severe polar vortices, eventually precipitating a new ice age, but hopefully not for a few more centuries. In the 2020s, more volcanoes will erupt and earthquakes occur with consequent tsunamis. Volcano winters and other effects, especially around the Pacific Ring of Fire. Expect major eruptions in Indonesia, Japan, Iceland, the Canary Islands, Central America, and the Caribbean. But let's look beyond the 2020s. the harmonic convergence of the 2020s. This is your wake-up call. Some of you may remember the harmonic convergence, the world's first globally synchronized meditation on August 16th through 17th of 1987, when an exceptional alignment of planets occurred in our solar system. According to Jose Arguelles, one of the principal organizers of the event, the timing of the harmonic convergence correlated with the Mayan calendar. The chosen dates marked a grand trine planetary alignment with the Sun, Moon, Mars, Venus, and Mercury in Virgo, Jupiter in Aries, and Saturn and Uranus in Sagittarius. On the given dates, thousands of people congregated at power centers such as Mount Shasta and Mount Fuji, where the spiritual energy was particularly strong. The belief was that if 144,000 people assembled at these power centers and meditated for peace, the arrival of a new era of world peace would be facilitated. Well, in actuality, many times that number participated, and it worked. Shortly afterwards, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduced a major policy reform known as perestroika, restructuring, overhauling the entire Soviet political and economic system. This led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, revolutions in Eastern Europe, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, and the end of the Cold War. So I propose a similar global ritual event to catalyze the awakening of Gaian consciousness throughout the world. Archimedes of Syracuse, who lived from 287 to 212 BCE, was one of the greatest wizards of history, inventing the entire field of mathematics and founding one of the earliest mystery schools. He is famously quoted as saying, "Give me a place to stand, a fulcrum, and a lever long enough, and I will move the world." Well, we have a place to stand, Gaia herself, our great Mother Earth. And we have a lever longer than Archimedes could possibly have imagined, the internet. All we need is the fulcrum, our vast global community of pagans, Gaians, and New Agers to hold at a given time a magical intention in meditative focus. Awaken. It is a universal practice to prepare for a major magical working with a vigil period of inward turning, purification, fasting, abstinence, meditation, seclusion, and retreat from mundane distractions. And this new decade, as if on cue, is open with just that condition for billions of people worldwide. All we need to do now is choose a time and create a ritual and spread the word, just like Jose Arguelles did in 1987 with her harmonic convergence. It's time to wake the world. The perfect times for such rituals of global awakening will be October 14th, 2003, and April 8th, 2024. October 14th, 2023, and October 8th, 2024, April 8th, 2024. And the perfect places will be along the paths of totality of two solar eclipses that will span most of the United States and Mexico on those dates. First, an annular eclipse on October 14th, 2023, just 2 years from now, will cross the western states from Oregon to Texas. And then less than a year later, on April 8th, 2024, a total solar eclipse will be visible across Mexico and the American Midwest from Texas all the way up through Maine and New Brunswick. X marks the spot for San Antonio, Texas, which will experience both of these. Millions of people will gather along the paths of totality to view and hail the eclipses as harbingers of a new golden age. As people unite in a common vision, a self-propagating soliton waves of consciousness manifestation will occur along the paths of totality to spread around the globe. So for all our talented ritualists out there, let's see some rituals for this intention that people can conduct along the paths of the lunar shadows on the chosen dates. Well, we have to now examine the issue of big lies versus big truths. Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels was said to have said, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. Now, I've always wondered why people usually seem far more willing to believe lies than truth, but maybe it has to do with the scale. The expression big lie was coined in 1925 by Adolf Hitler when he dictated his book Mein Kampf about the use of a lie so colossal that no one would believe that someone could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. Hitler wrote, in the big lie, there is always a certain force of credibility because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted in the deeper strata of their emotional nature than consciously or voluntarily. And thus, in the primitive simplicity of their minds, they more readily fall victims to the big lie than the small lie, since they themselves often tell small lies in little matters, but would be ashamed to resort to large-scale falsehoods. It would never come into their heads to fabricate colossal untruths, and they would not believe that others could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. Even though the facts which prove this to be so may be brought clearly to their minds, they will still doubt and waver and will continue to think that there may be some other explanation. Well, that's what Hitler said. So the question that I've been wrestling with all my life is the obvious corollary. If you tell a truth big enough and keep repeating it, will people eventually come to believe it? So over the past 50 years, in every way possible, I've been telling and repeating the big truth of the Gaia thesis, that the biosphere of planet Earth is a single vast living organism, tracing a continuous and unbroken lineage of protoplasm and DNA all the way back to the Cambrian explosion 444 million years ago. Many, myself included, believe that the fertilizing agency was brought to Earth in a pollinating comet. We have always known her by many names among all peoples as Mother Earth, and moreover, she is now beginning to awaken. This is exactly analogous to our own individual bodies, in which our trillions of cells trace a continuous and unbroken lineage of protoplasm and DNA all the way back to the moment of our conception, when an ovum of our mother was fertilized by a sperm from our father, creating a zygote from which all cells in our body subsequently derived. And eventually, we awaken. The big lie is that we are all separate. The big truth is that we are all one. This single big truth has the power to unify all humanity as children of the same mother. It has the power to heal our endemic and tragic alienation from each other and from the living earth. So we pagans are engaged in a great experiment to promote a big truth so colossal and irrefutable that all people will eventually come to believe it. And I think the experiment is going very well indeed. At more than 4 million adherents, according to the latest surveys, modern paganism is now the second largest religion in America and the fastest growing. And a similar awakening is being reported around the world. The Gaia thesis is a metastasizing meme. So I believe that the two-handed coordination required for playing music and operating modern computer consoles and games is stimulating not only a reawakening of the subconscious right brain hemispheres of humanity, but a full synchronization of both forms of mentality into a new ambidextrous consciousness that will be able to sustain the awakened mind of Gaia. It is with the awakening of consciousness in our own minds as the billions of neurons in our brain linked up synergistically, just so shall we all participate in the awakening of Gaia herself and our full apotheosis. Scientist philosopher Teilhard de Chardin, who lived from 1881 to 1955, envisioned just such an awakening of planetary consciousness as the omega point, the ultimate fulfillment of the entire purpose of creation and evolution. This would be the point in time when the individual consciousnesses of all living beings on Earth coalesce into a single collective consciousness. In his 1955 book, The Phenomenon of Man, Chardin said, "We are faced with a harmonized collectivity of consciousness to a sort of superconsciousness, the Earth not only becoming covered by myriads of grains of thought, but becoming enclosed in a single thinking envelope, a single unanimous reflection. Now, just as each of us awakened into consciousness as an infant, so too is Gaia herself poised on the threshold of a planetary awakening, the evolution of consciousness into the next quantum leap. In Eastern traditions, this is called enlightenment. It is a full awakening of the spirit in which one experiences with every fiber of one's being the full connection with all other beings throughout all of time and space. It is the integration of both brain hemispheres into simultaneous consciousness rather than the normal alternation of one or the other from waking to sleeping. We call this apotheosis, literally deification or becoming divine. It has been imagined that this might come about as a kind of universal telepathy, but I think the emergence and rapid evolution of the internet is already providing the seeds of a technological vehicle of global consciousness through which this awakening will inevitably manifest. In the 1926 interview with Collier's magazine that I referred to earlier, visionary inventor and prophet Nikola Tesla said, "When wireless is perfectly applied, the whole earth will be converted into a huge brain, which in fact it is, all things being particles of a real and rhythmic whole. We shall be able to communicate with one another instantly, irrespective of distance. Not only this, but through television and telephony, we shall see and hear one another as perfectly as though we were face to face, despite intervening distances of thousands of miles. And the instruments through which we shall be able to do this will be amazingly simple compared with our present telephone. A man will be able to carry one in his vest pocket." Ha! Well, we stand at a great crossroads in evolution, the most critical in the entire history of life. The very technology which presently threatens all life on this planet could alternately be used to build starships to carry our descendants throughout the galaxy. Perhaps humans are intended to be the spores or gametes of Gaia. Reproduction is, after all, an essential function of all living systems, and this applies no less to a living planet. I predict that in the next 60-year renaissance, in the 2080s, we will see the beginnings of the great diaspora of humanity out into the stars. Diaspora means scattering or dispersion, particularly of a people with a common origin, such as the Jews after the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 CE. But the root of the word, spirion, means to sow, as in the planting of seeds. Establishing space colonies, terraforming barren worlds, flying Mother Nature's silver seeds to a new home, as Neil Young sang, may be the most important purpose for the evolution of a technological species. And one day, seedlings of Gaia will be planting new roots in distant soil beyond the farthest star. Remember, the Chinese word for crisis is composed of two characters, meaning danger and opportunity. So in closing, I would like to share these comments from last year by Nicholas Kingsley, who is 27 years old and provost of the Gray School Wizardry, and my apprentice protege for the past 5 years. He said, "This new decade carries with it a vast wave of possibility. A magic started long ago. This spell of change dates back to our elders and beyond. 2020 is not just any year, but the latest in a long cycle of creative renaissances. It is in these moments when the baton of paradigm-shifting power is passed that those who stand to inherit the responsibility make ready. While these first 20 years of the new millennium have been shaped in many ways by conflict, I believe it is with the experience of these events that the leaders of tomorrow will be able to develop empathy and understanding. I believe that these next few years will see a change in the way humanity views the world and how we interact with it for the better, working towards renewable energy and exploring the heavens beyond our world for new answers. Whilst there has been war, so too has communication and interconnectivity taken root and grown like a weed. Never before has it been so easy to speak with a friend on the other side of the country or make a friend on the other side of the world. In the years to come, I see this interconnectedness continue to grow and flourish. In this turning of the age, I see an opportunity to grow, heal, and live in a world we